Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar Business Transfers in Flanders. What can we learn from it? My name is Patrick Jortens from Flanders Innovation Entrepreneurship. Next to me is Eddie Laveren from Antwerp Management School. Today's webinar will be in English because we have a lot of viewers from other countries in Europe. Welcome to all Transeo members, the Association of Business Transfer Experts, and of course everyone in Flanders, welcome as well. Today's webinar is about the business transfer barometer, and I hope that you will get some insights what we as government can do to update our SME policy, and colleagues in other countries can benefit from this as well. And the advisors and business support organizations, of course, can get some inspiration to tailor their services to the clients. The barometer actually consists of two surveys. Both of them Eddie was involved in, and I will give him in a few minutes the word. Now we can see what we will do today. After that we have talked about the two surveys, I will give some conclusions in the end, but during the webinar, don't hesitate to ask some questions. We will try to answer them during the webinar. Eddie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Well, we get the opportunity to have a survey on business transfer. I did it not alone, I was the coordinator of the study, but also Professor Tensi Stijvers and Ine Umans from the University of Hasselt was cooperating with the study. Business transfer, of course, is one of the biggest challenges for every company, and it's crucial for to be well prepared for such succession. The objectives of the studies were about to what extent are companies involved in succession planning, what information channels do they use, what problems do they encounter. What we did, we sent an online survey to Flemish SMEs, and we sent it to the CEOs of and managing directors of over 55 years old.
Mm-hmm. Well, you told that it's crucial to be well prepared when there is succession. Why is it essential that it is such well prepared? Because the entrepreneur can think soon I'm not anymore in my business. So why keep attention on this?
I think we can say that business transfer is a complex process and takes also several years to be completed. So you have to start in time with that process. It is divided in different activities with selection of the entrepreneur, successor, communication aspects, strategy after transfer, the role of incumbent. So it means that for every aspect, you have to take the right decision. It creates also a lot of tensions in the company, and so it's best to be best prepared.
Okay, thank you. Go on.
Okay, so we sent the survey and we received more than 700 answers, but some of the answers were not completed. So we deleted a number of surveys. Our report is based on 489 questionnaires. What we see is that 60% almost are micro companies and 40% are larger companies. What do we regard as a micro company? Is a company with less than 10 employees. That's very important to remember for this study. We have also 82% companies that they regard themselves as family business. That means more than 50% of the shares ownership. With respect to the age of the CEO, the managing director, we see that most of the respondents are more in the category of 55 to 60 years old, and the second category is then the 60 to 65 years. And another aspect to introduce the study is the diversity of industries, and we see different industries here are represented in the study. Most important are the commerce and the services. Of course, an important question is we make a distinction in our study between leadership transfer and ownership transfer, and we do it also in this presentation. And with respect to leadership transfer, we asked the first question to respondents, on what time, within what time frame you want to transfer the leadership. What you can see here, that this year about 60% will be transferred within next 5 years. It's a little bit increased than in 2015, but it's almost the same. Almost 6% doesn't know about the leadership time period.
The unknown, that's almost half from 4 years ago. So people are better preparing now?
Well, it's difficult to say what is the real, it depends on the different sample, of course. So it's not that, it's certainly, it's not too high, it's not increased, but I think it has to do with the sample.
Okay, thank you.
Then the next question, the same questions about the transfer of ownership. Within which time frame do you see that? Well, we see here that almost also 50% of the respondents say that will have a transfer of ownership within 5 years. It is an increase, and when we see it, we compare to 2015. 2015, only 37%, 38% want to be transferred within 5 years. That's an important change between the two studies. We can see. Another important element in this slide we can see is that the people that doesn't know when they want to transfer the ownership is rather high, 27%. It's less than 5 years ago, but it's still almost 3 out of 10 companies.
Yeah. Does this also mean that the transfer of leadership comes before the transfer of ownership?
Well, normally we expect that the transfer of leadership can be quicker and can be done more times than ownership. But it could be the same, but we see more that ownership does happen more frequently, and that's the reason perhaps that the figure is lower. Another question, of course, is about the planning of the business transfer. They make a distinction between transfer of leadership and transfer of ownership. How do we measure that? Perhaps some words about that. We looked at 12 different activities, and we grouped the activities in 4 divisions: selection of successor, communication activities, strategies after the business is transferred, and also what do the incumbent do after the transfer. We measure that. What we see here is that almost 40% of the companies are not busy with those activities of planning the business transfer of leadership. When we look at those companies within 5 years, it's almost 30%, 1/3. The figures are much higher when we look at ownership. When we look at ownership, it's almost 50%, 53% are not busy with real preparation of the ownership transfer. That's a rather high figure. It's when we look at the subgroup of those people who want to transfer within 5 years, we see here 30%. But we see a large high number of persons not busy with the transfer ownership. What's also important, that the micro companies are those that are responsible for the high figures.
Okay.
We see here that the micro companies are more not busy with the transfer.
And any idea why?
Well, perhaps the answer could be later on, because we can see later on that a lot of people are thinking, smaller companies think of a liquidation of the company. So I think it has to do also with that answer, that they say why to prepare if we want to liquidate the company.
It seems logic.
But also they have less people in the company that are experienced with this important decision. So it could be that they also more emotional problems, for example. I think in smaller companies, there's more risk that the emotional problems become upfront. So it could be that they are hesitating to start discussion about transfers. An important question in our survey was also what is the purpose of the transfer of the business in the future? Do we sell the firm externally to an external company, or do we transfer the business to the family? And there we see an important difference between the study of 2015 and 2019. We see this year in 2019 that the transfer within the family is only 40%. And that in 2015 it was almost 58%. But this year we see that the transfer of the external sale to another company is increased from 32% in 2015 to 47%. That means that more and more companies are thinking to transfer the firm to an external party. That's an important change in figures between 2015 and 19. We see also rather a high liquidation, increase in liquidation. And if I may say so, the next slide is very give an impression how this comes. We see that most micro companies are intent to liquidate firms. And we see that all the larger firms are not intent to liquidate the firms. I think it has to do with firms with 2 or 3 persons. They don't want to give the firm to the children and say, well, we liquidate, cash in the money and give the money to the children, and they can do their own way in the business.
If I go back to the family succession in 2015, almost 60% thought about family succession. This year, only 40%. Does this mean that children are not interested anymore, or is the scenario more realistic that they in 4 years ago thought that the children would be interested, and now they know they're not interested?
But I think I can refer to another question, not in my slides here, is what is the reason why they want to sell the firm externally? And the most important reason they give was to get the financial out of the firm. So more and more firms doesn't want to give over the firm to their children. Not their own, sometimes they're not capable, they're not competent for doing that. But we also see that a lot of smaller firms want to cash in the amount today with all the uncertainty, perhaps with the future of the business, and they give the money to the children, and they can choose their own way to do business.
Okay.
Of course, it is important that you look for some information. There are a lot of information outside in the world that you can consult. And here we can see an overview of those information sources they have looked for. The 3 most important are advice and coaching first, and then the information sessions and workshops organized also by the Agentschap Innoveren Ondernemen, and also the informal talks with fellow entrepreneurs. That's very important for a lot of people. And you see other information, webinars, brochures, also possible information source they will take.
So a first tip for business support organizations is that it's not only important to organize information sessions and workshops, but also to facilitate the informal contacts between entrepreneurs and with advisors and coaches.
I think that's right. If you see the informal talks with fellow entrepreneurs, gathering with fellow entrepreneurs and exchange ideas informally has an important meaning there. And also advice and coaching. If you need more advice and coaching how to do it, well, I think it's important to support those activities.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, a question we also asked was, do you discuss your business transfer with other people? And we see that 90% discussed at least with one person, with another party. It's a strong increase within the study of 4 years ago, and there we had 73%. What are the most important parties with whom the transfer is being discussed? We see there accountant, of course, certainly because a lot of smaller companies in our sample. Also of the potential successors, but also, of course, the family shareholders and other parties. Fourth rank is the advisory companies.
So the accountant is the most important speaking partner?
According to our figures, a lot of people say that they talk first with their accountant to give impression. So it's also perhaps with valuation problems or financial problems, fiscal problems, we see that are the most important problems.
But if you then go back to the previous slides, accountants and bankers are only 18% as a source of information. So what's exactly the role of the accountant in giving or guiding to information?
I think they have to give a first idea what are the steps to be taken, and if the firm is ready to start thinking of business transfer. In the figure about information sources, perhaps accountants are giving out advice and coaching, perhaps in some way, and give also part of information sessions. So it could be a duplicate of answers, I think.
Yeah.
What's important in this slide is also 25% of respondents who plan the transfer of leadership within 5 years has not yet discussed. And if you look at the transfer of ownership, it's up to 1/3 of the companies.
That seems a lot.
That seems a lot. So if I refer to that, a business transfer process takes almost 3 to 5 years, it's certainly time to start thinking about some activities of planning. I think that's also one of the insights of this study, that there are still work to do to create awareness that it's still time to start thinking about business transfer. Are there some constraints with planning the business? And here we see that financial reasons and also unfavorable market conditions could be very responsible for some problems. That is also perhaps the reason unfavorable market conditions where there's high liquidation. It could be have a correlation perhaps. We have a lot of reasons. You can see that on the slide. Lack of knowledge could be important, administrative reasons, but also for family reasons could be. And for ownership, important figure perhaps is the duration of the preparation, because it's more important to share ownership transfer than the leadership, because it has to do with money, with legal aspects. It's certainly more important to be careful there what they are doing. A last question about the first study is about the role of the CEO after the business transfer. Of course, 70% say we want to have more leisure time. But you see here that also a lot of people answer that they want to do and want to stay some professional active in the firm, being as advising the company, being as taking a seat in the board of directors, but also PR function. So there are different roles we can take up when you are participating in the business transfer.
Okay, so this was what you wanted to tell us about the first survey you did at entrepreneurs older than 55 years old. To the audience, if you want to ask some questions, just use the chat box and we will try to give you the answer right away. Don't wait until the end of the seminar. I suggest we go with the second survey and tell us more about it.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Well, a second survey is a survey we have done with startup companies. There are companies with less than 4 years old, and also growth companies that had at least 3% growth every year, and we make their distinction with high growth and low growth. It's also the same people of Hasselt. We work together to perform this study. When you start a business, you can start a business by buying another company, but also by starting for building up a new business from scratch. There are two possibilities. Well, we see that takeover is less risky, and it's also the success rate is much higher when you have a takeover. And therefore, the government asked us to study if starters and all growth companies realize that the takeover is a possibility to start a company. And we look at different aspects. We will discuss it in a moment. We sent a survey to startup companies and also to growth companies. We have in our study here we have more answers, but also here we also selected the significant answers here. We have 225 startup companies and 182 growth companies. The first question we have asked is about who is busy with thinking about the takeover as a possible way of starting a business. First, we have the companies who start a business. 12%, but also 15% are thinking about, have thought about a takeover. When we take them together, it's almost a quarter of the firms, of the startup companies, are thinking or have done a takeover.
Yeah.
The figure is much higher if we go to the next slide, when we talk about growth companies. There we see that almost 60%, more than 60%, are thinking of, have done a takeover. 26% have done a takeover in the previous year, and we see that more fast growth companies have done more takeovers.
Okay, I have a question from the audience, and this has to do with the first study. They want to know, is there any, are there any other studies in other countries so you can compare? I know that there is a business transfer barometer in Finland. Croatia has done some studies. Can you tell us about the differences or the comparisons?
It's of course a very broad question. We did prepare that, but one of the things that I remember is the trend towards external sale is also in other countries, certainly the more developed countries. We see more and more firms that want to transfer the business to an external party. It's not in all countries the same, but more in a lot of countries we see the same trend. And also in our country now we see that that is important change. But with the rest, I think we are a normal country that has the same similar, and we have to study different, the world is broad. There you have different kinds of industry, different kinds of more family, non-family firms. It's very difficult to answer in few words without all the figures to compare this question. But certainly that aspect, I think that more and more firms are sold externally. That's the same trend we hear in other studies from other countries.
Yeah. Well, for the people who are interested, I can refer to the website of Transeo, where some of the international studies are available, and then you can compare yourself. Okay. Go on, Adi.
One of the questions was, what do you see as advantage of acquiring an existing business? And we asked it from the start, but also the growth companies. When we look at the starters, well, the first answer is having an existing customer base is very important. And also to certainty, have more certainty about turnover. And the third most important reason is the presence of knowledge within the firm that take over. When we look at the same question within growth companies, they're almost the same. If they take over a company because of their complementary product and services they have, they access new markets or with respect to have increase of turnover, and also they are referring to the competent staff they have in existing business that could be very interesting when they take over a company. So I see these motives why they do a takeover are very similar between starters and growth companies.
Very important.
Of course, a lot of companies would think about the takeover, that doesn't do the takeover. And so we asked the question, what were the reasons why you didn't take over another firm? And here we see with starters that the most important answer was they didn't find the suitable firm. That's very important to stress that there must be more activities perhaps to match sellers and buyers.
Suitable can refer to the activity of the company, to where the company is situated, or the price of the company.
The price, of course, is important, but also the culture, I think. Certainly we talk with smaller companies, the culture, the governance of the company could be very important. They work with people, and it must match or not only with finance.
So it has a lot to do with trust between the seller and the buyer of the company.
When I have done other studies some years ago, what are the reasons why a selling process is abrupted? Because the price would be too high, but also there's no trust anymore between the two parties. It's very important.
Yeah.
Also, third reason was the future is very uncertain, and we can't prove that the business is very profitable in the future. But also the trust is certainly important in a process of business transfer. So we talk about the reasons why you didn't do a takeover. There's no business found, but also they regard the risk too high, too risky to take over the company. And the third was very important to see is difficulties regarding the valuation. And for startup companies, even there, it's not easy to evaluate the company due to lack of information, perhaps. But it's the third reason why they didn't do a takeover. And this reason, difficulties regarding the valuation, is much more important with growth companies. When we see here 37% is the most important reason for growth companies, even there, I think stimulating and giving more information how to value a company, perhaps more online tools and checklists and such like that, is much important for ameliorating the business transfer process, I think. Also lack of time, excuse me, and the too risky or two other arguments for growth companies.
Now, valuation is often on basis of the past. You buy a company for future growth. So why is valuation that important?
Well, it's important for the buyer. He has to pay, of course. So he has to pay not more than the value of the company it's worth in the future. So you can look at the past, but the past is not always the best reference. It's a start, but when you transfer a business, there is a change in leadership. There's a change in decision-making processes. So there will be a change in organization and in also activities. So you have to look at the future also, and that's not easy. And therefore, I think they say difficulties with regard to valuation.
Yeah.
Okay. Of course, you have also another question was startups who have done a takeover. How did you find the other company? It is important to know. And this is important to see here in our slides, what we present now is that family and friends, network of fellow entrepreneurs, and also the matching platforms are regarded as important aspects and opportunities to find other businesses. And when we look at more the growth company, the companies that grow in the future, they will see that network of fellow entrepreneurs and also the role of advisors, mediators is important. So I think here this slide also find out that again the network of fellow entrepreneurs is very important. Also for this has been this study, like we also already mentioned in the first study.
There's another question from the audience again regarding reasons why companies are not acquired. Can you see any differences between sectors? Was the sample large enough to draw conclusions about this?
Well, we have to study that. We can't give an answer immediately. I can look at it and give the answer later on. But there's certainly a difference in industries also in this study. But I don't have the figures in mind with that.
We'll do that in written after the box. Okay, thank you.
Of course, a takeover process is not easy. It encounters different aspects. And so we also ask what are the problems you encounter during the takeover process. It's important to say that almost 40% doesn't have a problem, but it means 60% encounters problems. And so we have to work on those companies to ameliorate the situation. What are the most important problems they experience? Too little transparency by the selling party. And what are they doing? What are they thinking about the future? Is every information known by the selling party, by the buying party, excuse me? Complex regulation. Start to say it's not too complex, the legal aspects, and I can imagine that they assume that. Takeover process took longer than expected, and also it was more complex than expected. So I think also startup companies need some help to these last two arguments. When we look at growth companies, also 33% has no problems, But difficulties with integrating the processes into administration is the second most important problem they encounter. I can imagine that if you buy another company with other processes, other administration, it takes some time to change systems, to integrate the cultures also. That's also do with this, I think. Problems with evaluation is also mentioned by the growth companies, that it was very difficult to evaluate the future. So when you listen to the seller, it's all good news, perhaps, but yeah, you must be very critical too about the future of the company. Therefore, it's very important to make a strategic plan, what you will do after the transfer, and try to make the strategic effect into financial terms.
Yeah.
And then the other arguments we can read in this slide.
Yeah. One viewer asks why we make a distinction between starters and growth companies, and where is the difference? Actually, it were two separated surveys, and maybe you can repeat the samples.
Yes, there were different studies. So we first had a study to starter companies. They are only young companies, very young companies.
Less than
4 years old.
Yes.
And that was a separate study. And the figures you see in these slides are referring to that survey. And then we did another survey because we were really interested in high growth companies. And we give here with all growth companies because the topic about business is also important for those growth companies. But I think that that are the companies with more than 4 years old. So there are no overlap of the companies within the two surveys.
So young, fast-growing startups are in the left category.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. But well, the sample size not that large that we could do all things we want to do. So we have to be very careful. We can say a lot of the total sample, but if you subdivide in the samples, it's very difficult to have significant answers.
Yeah. Another question from the same viewer. He asks, so every company older than 4 years old is a growth company? That's not the case.
No,
they were selected on growth prestations, performance in the past years.
We send out a survey to growth companies defined as more than 3% per year for the next 3 years. So of the last 3 years, let's say. So it could be not every company older 4 years is a growth company. That's reverse.
Okay. Financing.
Yes, there we also see a difference in view. When we look at the starters who have done a takeover and who have done starting a firm with from scratch, starting a new business. We look first at start with take over another firm. They say 60% say the financing was less difficult. So they mean that the financing is no problem. But when they look at those starters who start a new business, they say that 11% say that the finance is more difficult for a takeover. So there's a difference in view. But I must say, in the second category, when you start a business from scratch, 78% has no. So I think they didn't have a good clue about how difficult is the financing of takeover.
Could this also mean that those who answered in the left column actually didn't consider an acquisition?
I think so. I think most of the starters who start a new business go for start a new business. Only 25% thinking about a takeover. So more than 75% are starting new business.
Okay.
Okay. Then the same question about financing was asked to the growth companies. And then it's important to see that 60% has no problem financing a takeover. And if they have problems, there are only few problems. And I can imagine that. If you have a very good growth company with a future that's important to grow, well, every business can be financed, I think.
Okay, that's good news.
A lot of place in the survey is also went to the question about, do you know services that can help you with your business transfer? And of course, we have divided the different services in different categories: information sessions, training activities, advice activities, coaching opportunities, and also online tools and checklists. What we see on the answers here in these slides about starters and growth companies, almost 70% say that they know different activities. So they are well known about a lot of services there. When we see in the next slides, how many do you use, which activity do you participate in, then we see that 20 or 30% less of the firms. So we see there 50% of the firms make use of some activities in our list, and we see almost the same figures. We see a little bit less on online tools and checklists, but that could be, and certainly for growth companies, but could be that there are less checklists at this moment. So perhaps the suggestion is to have increased some, try to have some online tools and checklists also for growth companies and also for startup companies. And then a last question we ask and will present in this survey is about the question, which aspects of the business transfer process are needed to be supported? And here we see that financial and legal and also fiscal aspects are the most important aspects to be searched for. And the same answer is for starters and growth companies. Other aspects, of course, are valuation of the company. And certainly for growth companies, they need to ask for more aspects, more information about that. And also the stages of a different takeover process is important to have more information on how it goes, how the process is structured over time.
In the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the culture of a company to be acquired and the difficulties in the process before the acquiring. I would expect that services concerning human resources would be more asked than is mentioned here in this study.
That was also one of the observations I had here. So I put this HRM things and also the more emotional things in this slide. 35% of the starters say that they need more information about that. And 23%. So I think it's surprising for me also that figure. But it's understandable that when we do an ownership transfer, well, that legal aspects are important. Financial, it must be financed, and also fiscal. Pay not too much taxes, but you have to structure a company also with respect to fiscality.
Could this also, this low figure concerning human resources aspects, could this also mean that they are not aware of what exactly is important on those aspects, and therefore they don't know where to look for information, to look what kind of information?
I think so. I think when you look at the literature also, the literature about business is more about technical aspects. You find less information about emotional aspects, human resource aspects. They are important. Also, when we go to conferences, I may say as a professor, more and more papers are also discussed about human resource aspects. But we see that's not the majority. So accounting, finance, fiscality, also management, organization is much more discussed. It could be a reason why you don't think about that.
There was a question from one of our viewers. The problems that growth companies are experiencing, is there any consistency in it?
Well, I think that for several years now is the situation so that if you have a good company, you find always money, even for the transfer. Even there are different kinds. We have also crowdfunding, where you can take up some money. You have also vendor loans where the seller wants to finance part of the transfer price. So there are different financial instruments you can use, and I have the impression that the last years, when we ask questions about the problems of financing, only the smaller companies, and they are not always the growth companies, the smaller companies with less than 5 employees, they have at this moment most problems for finding financing. If you're a growth company with, let's say, 20 to 50 employees, I think there are a lot of opportunities to find money, even for business transfer. So I don't think that's and that we see for some years now.
Yeah, okay. So that was, there's another question. I'm just going to take a closer look. Florian asks, from our experience, emotional factors are important. Is there any hint on that in your study?
Well, what we discussed, the human resource aspects are mentioned as a problem, but not as the first problem. In that sense, I think I must say we didn't focus only on emotional factors. It was a general survey of different aspects without going to tail of financial and emotional factors. It was more about the planning of the business transfer.
Okay. So I think this was the information about the two surveys we wanted to talk about today. From my point of view, I've drawn 8 important conclusions. And the first is that less than half of the family firms actually expect family succession. That seems low.
Well, it's going down. So we have countries where it's much higher. Like in Croatia, I think it was more than 50%. Well, we are now in a trend that's going down. So, and the reason I've said that a lot of firms within this environment of uncertainty, the world is uncertain this moment. They say, well, we want to sell if we find a good buyer, and give the money and do with the money new things. In other sectors, perhaps in other industries.
One important reason to sell the business instead of keeping it within the family is that the children are not motivated to take over the business.
Well, we didn't in this study. In the study of 2015, we have more studies done about what are the reasons of family transfer. It was not only on family transfer, this study, but there we saw that, of course, it's important if the family person is not ready, not competent, is an important reason not to transfer within the family.
Could the level of education of the children also be of importance, that they have other opportunities for their business career?
Like I said before, they want to have the money and give the money to the children and do their own thing. So if they want to start up a new business in digital industry or whatever, they can do it with the money, but not do the same as the parents before. So I see there a little change, I think.
So that's an important message that business support organizations can use to their clients, that if entrepreneurs expect to keep the business in the family, that they have to start preparing their children and asking them whether they're interested or not.
Well, I think if I may have some tips for future firms, well, take the time to prepare the business transfer, and certainly also involve your children on time. The earlier you involve the children, have a communication with them, I think perhaps there's more time to transfer within the family, and also search for external help. Also important.
A second important conclusion concerning the transfer of leadership and ownership, it is mainly so it's not prepared on a strategic level, but more practically, and especially the micro companies they wait to do so. That's right.
Yes, we see that most of the smaller companies, they don't plan, they plan less the preparation. So I think I have to say that.
So if we want micro companies to better prepare their business transfer or their liquidation, because that can also be the case, there's work to do.
I also want to add perhaps that not every company can be transferred. You have first to make a strategic plan, I think. Is it worldwide to transfer the business? An unprofitable firm, you don't have to transfer as such. So that's the first thing to do, and could be important also. And smaller companies perhaps have more problems with that.
Okay. Then another conclusion. Acquiring seems not attractive to most of the starters, but those who start via an acquisition, they are very content and they see a lot of advantages.
Well, indirectly we saw that more fast growth companies, they do more takeovers. So that proves that, of course, those companies that do takeovers can grow fast.
Yeah. And going back to the starters, so those who didn't actually did an acquisition, they think it's not attractive to do so, but those who did, they are very pleased with it. That seems contradiction.
Why?
Well, those who did it, they say you should, and those who did not, they say I think it's a good decision not to have an acquisition.
Well, if you do an acquisition, yeah, you have more opportunities for the future, of course. But you see that only very few of the starters want to start with the takeover.
Yeah. Then concerning the financing of an acquisition, starters who acquire an existing business and founders of new businesses have different perception in the different ways to financing an acquisition, and especially where they have to go to find the financial resources. What can we learn from this conclusion?
Well, it's not easy to say in that sense. Well, those who have taken takeover, they didn't have a problem with financing. So that proves that if you have a good proposal to take over a firm, well, you can find somewhere some financing. But if you start a business from new, there's more risk. It's not easy. There's also uncertain future, so it's more difficult to find financing. But they think that financing of takeover, because of the amount perhaps, because it's more money involved, it's more difficult. But we saw in our study that 78% had no opinion. So they didn't have a clue about that. So we can't say much about that interpretation.
Can this also have to do with the fact that growth companies have more own resources? They don't have to rely or not that much on bank credits?
Well, bank financing is, of course, still the most important financing in a lot of transactions. More than 2/3 of the companies use bank financing, but there are other opportunities. Of course, if you have growth companies, you create your equity yourself, your retained earnings can be used in the future to finance part of your future selling, buying price.
Then a last important conclusion is that companies who did not perform an acquisition, they think that they can find acquisition targets by talking to their accountant. But those who did an acquisition, they know they have to go to marketplaces and to M&A boutiques. That's rare.
Yeah, I think it's more important to see here that the activities of even the matching fund platforms are very important, certainly for the smaller companies, but not as such for the growth companies, because the scale could be different. But for the start, we saw that what's much important, but also for the two groups, the meetings with informal meetings with entrepreneurs in several occasions could be very important to get some information how for good tips how to do it.
Okay, I have a question from Marie, and she asks, what would be your advice to raise awareness among family businesses about the taboo of external acquisition?
Question is there a taboo of external acquisition?
Well, what I hear is that some entrepreneurs who go to